to the Number One Podcast,
where we give you an authentic look into the world's healthiest, wealthiest, and most inspirational minds.
We talk about trending topics, bold ideas, and give you real-world examples that will inspire you to take massive action and become the number one version of yourself.
On today's episode, this is our inaugural episode, our first episode. So it's going to be a little of a test run, but we do it big here. And so we're going to start with something that I think everybody can appreciate, and that is rock bottom. You know, what does it look like in your life? How do you bounce back when things really just aren't going your way? And I'm not talking about failures. I mean, when stuff is just really, really fucked up and, you know, you still want to bounce back and, you know, find a way out. So we're going to talk about some examples from our personal lives. And with that, I guess we'll just jump in. We should introduce ourselves. So I'll go first since I'm talking right now. My name is Forrest Anthony Knight Jr. Live here in Miami, Florida. I've been doing all types of cool stuff and dabbling in real estate. My day job is in, you know, business-to-business tech sales and more. I'd say overall, I'm trying to do what a lot of people are trying to do, which is, you know, ultimately be free, you know, generate passive income, surround myself with individuals like Andrew, who are also, you know, have that mindset of, you know, not really staying along the common path. And anyways, I'll pass it over to Andrew and he can introduce himself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Forrest. And I'm super excited to actually have, I guess, been able to have the pleasure of starting this podcast with Forrest. This was literally an idea that we sparked a week ago.
Right.
Literally last week. It was on Sunday.
Yeah, it's maybe been 8 days.
8 days ago.
Yeah.
We came up with the idea that we want to do a podcast. Within that very short time frame, Forrest got all this equipment, set everything up, and I'm just along for the ride. So honestly, like I can't take any, I can't take
effort.
Yeah, so it's a team effort. But at the end of the day, Forrest has done a phenomenal job. And, you know, something that I really want to touch base on is obviously the premise of this podcast is going to be talking about mindset, taking action, and ultimately becoming your best version, your number one version. But at the end of the day, I think that that's just like a perfect representation of like the ability that you took to take action in order to make this happen, especially in like such a short time frame. Because I think where a lot of people get stuck is, you know, they come up with an idea and then they sit on it for months, or they sit on it for weeks, or they just never take action, you know. Well, and
I was going to say, what's funny about that is I try to be hyper vigilant, right? We could all do a better job, but I even felt bad taking like 3 or 4 days, because I originally said, I was like, I'm going to buy stuff tonight. You probably remember saying like, I'm going to buy stuff tonight. And it took me a few extra days, but I've gotten to the point in my life where I'm like, I know that it's more important to just like get through that first iteration. Like this might not be the most perfect setup, but you know, we're doing it. It's probably going to do well enough. And, you know, you're not going to figure out, you know, what's wrong unless you get started. So, and I've been wanting to do a podcast for a while. So
that's
it
awesome.
works out. It's a perfect partnership.
So, and I guess, you know, I just wanted to give you some credit, you know, because of this. It's been like absolutely phenomenal. But to go back to introducing myself, my name is Andrew Loranger. If you want to find me on Instagram, it's Drew's The Move. And I'm actually in real estate. I do mortgages. I do a lot of the jumbo luxury, non-warrantable condos, the like crazy impossible deals of Miami's top real estate agents. So a lot of my incredible realtor partners, they go out and they find these terrific buyers. A lot of them are coming from New York right now. I mean, you just moved down here from New York.
Yep.
And, you know, they come to this market and they don't understand our market. It's like a completely different ball game. So their lenders back home can't get the deals done. So long story short, that's kind of where I come in. I have an expertise in Miami real estate, in lending, mortgages, and that's like my day thing.
Hit 'em up.
You know?
If you're buying a house, you know, bigger, hit up Andrew. He'll help you out. That's dope.
Yeah.
Love Miami, by the way. Also love New York. So if you're one of my New York friends, you're watching this thinking I ran away. I did not run away. I love the city. I love y'all, but Miami is dope.
It is.
Check it out here. I mean, we're filming this in my kitchen right now. Yeah, you could film this in the kitchen in New York, but it's different.
It is different. I mean, you can't beat New York summers, though. New York summers, rooftops.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Nothing beats it.
And I lived in New York for a very short period of time. So like I have just the utmost respect for New York. There's literally, so I grew up in Northern Virginia, right outside of DC, but it was like the countryside of Virginia. So my first job was baling hay on a farm, literally.
Sheesh.
You know, and so there's nothing like that I can even describe that compares to that feeling of that initial drive into the city when you're going through like New Jersey and you see the skyline and your heart's just like beating and you're like, oh my God, you can feel the energy.
The first time you fly into, so I moved from St. Louis. I'm a Midwesterner, right? So anybody who doesn't know me, grew up in St. Louis, Midwesterner at heart, still am, in the burbs, you know, but flying in that feeling when you fly into New York, because New York has that world appeal, right? If you haven't been there, I mean, you just get it. Like there are movies about New York, movies that are based in New York. It just has that feeling. So it's a great place. I did want to bring up though, like, how did we meet? Like how did we end up, like, we're here in Miami now. We're talking about New York. Like how the heck did...
I honestly, you know, we were actually talking about this, like, I don't know, a week or so ago, whenever you first moved down here, it was several weeks ago.
Yeah.
I was like, where the hell did we meet?
Yeah.
I don't even remember where we met. Was it a party or what? I mean, I know the premise. So we were in St. Louis. We were both working at Edward Jones, right? Were you working at Edward Jones at the time? Or were you I know you went to...
I was in the rotational program there. Yeah.
So I was a financial advisor in their career development program. So that was like my first move away from home, besides like living in New York in the summers. But they flew me out to St. Louis. They moved me out there for 6 months. And I was working in this like career development program where they were teaching us how to literally go knock on doors.
Yeah.
That was the job.
They're big on that. So if you apply for a job at Edward Jones as a financial advisor, you're going to be door knocking.
Literally door knocking. That's not a figure of speech. You're actually in the streets. We used to map out the neighborhood the night before of like the neighborhood we were going to go into and the first door that we were going to knock. Yeah. And the night before we had to drive through the neighborhood and be like, that's the door. That's the one that I'm starting at tomorrow. And like, I would feel sick getting out of the car, but it was just, I mean, that was my like dive into sales, you know, at the beginning. But I think we were at a party. So I don't even remember how it happened. Maybe it was...
We were probably at, so here's what happens. We're all 21, 20, no, probably 22, 23, because we just graduated college. First job out of college, I'm in a rotational program. The FAs, there's a ton of young FAs too. So you're kind of still in this cohort of young people that, you know, they're in the same stage as you. It's not like where you're later in life, it's like hard to meet. It's like literally you still had that group of people. And I'm betting we all just met as like all the early 20-year-olds at Jones at some party somewhere.
Yeah, we met
back
at
when
a party
we drank a lot.
But it's so crazy because I had this little apartment like on the outskirts of the city right by our home office at Edward Jones. And I literally was never there because I was like... I was hungover sleeping on your couch.
Yeah,
like 4 nights a week.
This man would show up at our house, which I wasn't mad about, but I'd be chilling. I live with a buddy of mine named Drake, and I would just hear a knock on the door. It'd be Andrew, or he'd be there like in the morning because we hung out that much. Like it was like all the time.
It was crazy.
It was good times. But yeah, let's dive into this topic. That's how we met, basically in St. Louis, starting our careers, having a lot of fun together. Yeah. You know, we've both grown up a bit since then, which is fine. Not knocking that lifestyle at all. I think everybody has you got to have fun. Still have fun now. But I want to talk about, you know, where we're headed. Like rock bottom. Like what does it mean? Like, or what was rock bottom for you? And kind of where you're going now, and kind of how do you place that as like, how do you feel about that experience? Yeah. And how did you like get out of that? Then I'll.
Sure. So, I mean, rock bottom, I think, is something different for everybody. Rock bottom could be, you know, it could have multiple layers, and it could be like your relationship. Everybody's had a rock bottom relationship, like something went south, right? Yeah. Everybody's had a rock bottom financial situation. Everybody's had a rock bottom, you know, something or other. Maybe it's health, right? So I think you really have to clarify first, like what justifies the rock bottom. You know, for me, it was something like financial and mental and emotional, but it all stemmed around financial, right? And I think more times than not.
Usually, I think that's a good point. It's usually not one thing. Like, it's usually easy. Like, if we get one bad thing happens, and if your life is together, it's fine. But usually, rock bottom is where it's like everything kind of spirals. Everything happens,
and
at
it can start at like. So for me, I think like relationally, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, like everything kind of suffered because of the financial rock bottom, and everything turned into rock bottom because of it. Because I allowed it to really hurt.
That's a note right there. We're gonna take notes in this podcast. I just decided. So everything spiraled out of control because of the financial instability, right? Yeah. What to say. So, geez, I got stuff everywhere. Continue though. Let me stop.
And so ultimately, my rock bottom was something that I think was totally avoidable. Absolutely avoidable. But it was something that I had to experience. And at the end of the day, now looking back after having been through that, like it was the most incredible experience of my life. Obviously, I would like never want to go through that again.
Yeah.
But the fact that I went through it and I am where I am now is just a testimony of faith and like my ability to push through and ultimately like not give up. And like some people may already know my story because I have shared it on a few platforms before, but you know, a few years back, I tried to start a tech company. You know all about this tech company.
I do.
We actually tried to get Forrest to be a developer for it because he has a broad experience in, you know, development.
Background in software
Engineering,
development, engineering. Yep.
And so we're like, Forrest, we need your help to build this app. So the premise was I was doing mortgages at the time. I was very, very successful for my age at doing mortgages. I ran an entire branch call center. We had like 15 people working for us. I mean, I put myself up in a beautiful condo here. I was like on the 47th floor at the Icon Brickell. If you know anything about Miami, it's it's literally an iconic building in Miami. It's absolutely gorgeous. And I had like the car of my dreams. You know, there was like every kid had like a poster of a car on their wall.
Yeah.
And like I literally got that car.
Yeah.
And so I had everything that I wanted, or so I thought, but I was just bored. I was like, I went into the office every day and the money was coming in, but it just like, I'm not a person that's really satisfied by the money. Like I want something more. I really value and cherish experience.
That purpose or
you know, and So one of my best friends from college, he actually, like him and I had this idea because we used to go out all the time together. And if you know anything about dining out, I mean, I guess it's a little bit different now with the introduction of some technologies in the marketplace, but like checking out was always a nightmare.
Yeah.
It was always a nightmare. And what we ended up coming up with was a mobile app for your cell phone where we would actually see an itemized receipt. And you could actually select what was yours and you could like put them all into a cart and you could pay and leave whenever you want to. And you don't have to deal with the receipts and the debit cards and credit cards. So at the time I was so obsessed. I'm like an all or nothing type of person.
Me too. Yeah.
I went all in on this app and I completely neglected the mortgage business, which was like literally funding my life.
Sure.
And so I went in so hard on this business, trying to get investors, building a pitch deck, trying to source funds, going restaurant to restaurant, trying to sell this after we had already put the money in to develop. You know, my business partner had put in a ton of his own resources to make this happen. And so my resources were really just hitting the streets, trying to sell, right? Doing the marketing, et cetera. And this thing ultimately, long story short, ended up being a massive failure. During the time frame that I had been trying to build this, I actually went to New York for like 6 months and hit the streets trying to sell this on like 3rd Ave and like Park and 34th, anywhere in Midtown, downtown. I was in meatpacking. I was in everywhere. Yeah. I was all over trying to get this thing sold. I came back to Miami. And so during this like time frame, I had completely neglected my mortgage business to the point where it like fell apart. And I remember coming back into this office. We had grown so fast. I expanded into 3 bigger offices within a year, like from one to another. We just kept growing. I came back and I had 2 employees left. Oof. Everybody had left. They had either been recruited or they just quit or they were let go. And like I checked my bank account and I'm literally $104,000 in credit card debt because no money had been coming in.
That's the bottom, by the way, guys. That's his bottom, which he's got out of, and we'll talk about on that. But before I want to talk about how he got out of it, or you share some details. Why do you think the company failed ultimately? The market wasn't ready, or I guess if you just look back at kind of that venture, like what was and by the way, guys, like most businesses fail and most successful entrepreneurs have failures just like that. Like, I've done plenty of bad deals as well. So all of that is going to go into, I think, kind of why we're having this conversation of like, you can't let these big major failures stop you from being successful, because ultimately these are the things that make you successful.
Yeah,
because
that's true.
You know so much more. Like, you know so much more about
everything.
You know, starting a business, selling, you know, a tech product, all of that, than somebody who is thinking about it. But yeah, maybe just go into like, you know, what do you think, like if there's one reason or 2 major reasons why you think you just couldn't get that business off the ground ultimately?
Well, I think one of the things was we had a consumer product, right? And the consumers loved this product. I mean, who wouldn't? You no longer have to mess with debit cards, you know, the little machines, trying to do the math for your tip. Like, you know, you don't have to do any of that. It was all solved. So the consumers loved this product. It was something that, like, every time we would tell somebody about it, they're like, where can I download it?
Yeah.
I want it now. And so what ended up happening is we had a ton of consumer attraction, but we had no restaurants that were allowing this as a payment platform. Yeah. nobody was accepting it as a payment method. And so my idea was we just go business to business and try to sell it on the streets to these restaurant owners. But if you know anything about the restaurant industry, which I didn't until this experience, like these people get bombarded all day long with people trying to sell them wine, rum, whiskey, food, something like they're getting bombarded all day. The payment processing platforms, all these different things, the POS systems, like people are trying to sell them stuff all day. So when you come in there, they're already like on the defensive. They don't want to talk to you. Trying to get you out the door as quick as possible because that's how they're trained. And then, on top of that, we're asking them to give us access to the meat and potatoes of the restaurant, which is their POS system where all the transactions, all the receipts go through. And we're asking to gain access through the back end channel of this POS, which is like, it's very scary for a lot of them. So I think looking back at it, the way that I would have done it, because that was obviously not the right way, is I would have probably gone to one of these POS systems and, sold it to them as like a white label product where they could keep it as an add-on. That's probably the way that I would have done it. And then we could have banged out 50 restaurants that have the POS in one swoop,
you just get all their access to their customer base.
So yeah, I mean, it wasn't that the idea was bad. And I think a lot of people that fail, it's not that the idea is bad, but maybe the strategy or execution, was just
I would even say, and I think that's a good point. I'd say that most ideas, well, I'm not gonna say most, a lot of ideas are really good, but it all comes down to strategy and execution.
Well,
right?
I've seen terrible ideas become successful just because the strategy was on point.
Yeah, the person makes it happen, right? And that's...
Or they have the right, backing, support, and mentorship in order to make it a reality. Somebody that's been down the road before.
There's a lot to learn there. But yeah, man, I think, I'll just jump right into some of them. There's two big events that I can think of, right? So we talk about relationships and kind of business. So one of the funny thing is at Edward Jones, I was dating somebody from college at the time. That relationship ended. Found out I had gotten cheated on, all that. So I went through that was like 9 years ago, right? But went through that, was like super depressed. So that's actually probably part of the reason I met you is because I was well, before that I was all, we were just chilling, booed up at the house. And then that summer, our buddy Drake is like, yo, you got to come out. And I was like, all right, dude, I was all depressed, all depressed and shit. And I was like, all right, let's go out, meet people. But that was really good for me because it allowed me to get out of because at the time I was like super like looking and settling down and not knocking it for anybody who wants to do that, but in my core, like that's not me. So like all of that happening really like reignited in me like, oh, now I can go do all this stuff I want to do. But it was a journey. Like it was a tough journey. I guess anybody who's, been betrayed in that way understands, gets it, yada, yada. And I guess spend a ton of time on that. But that was kind of like the initial ignition. The second one was with Drake again, living in St. Louis. We actually got kicked out of our apartment, right? I
remember that.
So we used to throw some crazy parties, right?
They were so big.
Honestly, parties, like, I don't know if I can, we just threw crazy parties. And like you would hear them like down the street probably, it was insane. And
you'd hear them at the entrance of the condo.
Yeah, and we'd have people knocking on our door and be like, hey, like you guys are being too loud. And we're like,
I'm 3 floors down and I have a crying baby.
We're gonna turn it down, and we just wouldn't turn it down.
Do you remember the guy? There was a guy that came up one time.
He lived
like,
above us, yeah.
Oh, did he? He's like, my baby's crying, my wife's gonna kill me.
My father and my mother live with me and all that. And first off, I was like, dude, why you got like 8 people in a 2-bedroom? Like, what are you doing up there?
Oh man.
But yeah, I mean, in any sense, so I'm not gonna go too deep into that because we were unfairly kicked out for sure. We were a bit of a menace. But we weren't the only people throwing parties in that building. I want to set the story straight that this community was like mostly like young people our age bracket throwing parties, debauchery, So we were doing, but we just had some of the worst neighbors you could possibly have in that building that did not appreciate that lifestyle. Ultimately, all those people moved out too because I moved back into that same apartment community later. But let's go back to the bottom, right? So I get kicked out of my apartment. I've got to call my mom up. I'm like, hey, Mom, I got to move back home. My family has since moved out of like our childhood home. They moved out years ago, right? So when I was 18, I moved out of my house when I was 18, right? And then they downsized the house. A bunch of stuff happened. Mom got remarried, stuff like that. So when I come back to live at my mom's house, I'm sleeping on the couch and I'm working out of the kitchen. Like I had a desk on cardboard boxes in the kitchen, right? And so I went from, and I'm driving my like white BMW with orange leather, and I just felt stupid, man. I felt really stupid driving up to, Belleville, Illinois, you know, my house, and like I'm trying to live, like I'm acting like out on the weekends, drinking, partying, feeling like I have something, you know, with my small little salary, and I'm sleeping on a couch and in my mom's kitchen. So it's not the worst thing that happened to me because I wasn't paying rent. You know, my mom loved having me at home, but when you're someone who's been out of the house since you're 18 and you have to come back home and sleep on the couch, and like, you know, I was living, because I was blowing my money, I was living like paycheck to paycheck, even though I shouldn't have. So that was like a real kick, like, hey, like you should get your shit together a little bit, you know, not do this. And honestly, like, you know, shout out to my mom, you know, for letting me just come crash at her house. But that, I mean, that's one of, I'd say just like a life failure for me. It wasn't necessarily a financial thing. But that was a life failure, and kind of, I'm gonna go back into you digging out of your debt, but kind of how I got out of that was, that's when I started to actually pursue, and it was a long journey for me. This was probably, I don't know how long ago it was. It was a long time ago now. I'm 30 now. But that's when I first really started to look at mindset. So the first thing with the relationship was where I started to focus on like, okay, I know what I want out of life. I'm going to do that. This is where I actually started to think about, okay, how can I actually get it? Who do I need to become to actually have these things?
Yeah, that's huge.
Or become these people that I look up to. Yeah, because, you know, it's not so simple. Like there's a lot of things that I do now in my morning routine and all of that, and it takes time to get there. Some people can flip a switch. I wasn't able to. You know, it took a lot of time and effort for me, to be honest. Like I've been working on it, still working on it, but yeah, it's just curious on. I know you had to like grind, like just grind mode. So like, what did it look like for you to?
Well, it's so funny you mentioned like moving back home.
Yeah.
Because that was the last thing I wanted to do. Imagine I'm like living. I mean, I came from small, rural, the middle of nowhere, Virginia, and you know, I'm here living in Miami, like living in a manner that what I've been able to tell about 90% of people that are from Miami are not doing. You know, and so that was like a huge accomplishment for me, being like in the condo I was in, surrounded by the people I was with, having the employees that I had, just being in the position that I was in. And so for me, when all of this stuff went down, like it was inevitable. I ended up losing my apartment. I ended up losing my car. I ended up just losing basically everything that I had like built because of the poor decisions that I had made, and like the lack of proper execution from this business. And so I just remember after kind of losing everything and being at what I would say is my rock bottom, I was just like devastated. I actually, you know, I've got, there's a friend here in Miami that actually was letting me stay on her couch. Yeah. And I was literally sleeping on her couch at night. I was using my storage unit, which is like the only thing I had left to my name, which I was paying for with a credit card still. Yeah. And I was using that as my closet. So I was literally going to her place. I was sleeping on the couch at night. I was going in the morning. I was going to my storage unit, changing into a suit, and still hitting the streets trying to sell this app to these restaurants. And, you know, and the craziest part was like, nobody knew what I was going through besides this woman. Like I didn't tell my parents what was happening. I didn't tell anybody that was happening other than my friend here in Miami.
Do you think that was, I just remembered another story where I was literally squatting for like 3 months. I don't know how I forgot that one. I've always been grinding, but do you think that was good or bad that you didn't share that at the time? Because I feel like personally, like when you're in that grind mode, it's almost better to just like
own it.
Just grind it out, you know?
Yeah. And I think honestly, if I had shared my struggle with some people, I think I would have gotten a lot of empathy and support. And I probably wouldn't have just had this one option of like sleeping on this one person's couch, you know, but, sure. And you know, I could have probably leveraged my connections to be like, look, like I'm going to fail if like I don't get some help. And it could have probably ended up opening some doors. You know, I've heard a lot of times people say like, the devil uses isolation, right, in order to control you. Sure. Like a lot of times you don't want to share what you're going through with anybody, and you end up like just becoming isolated and separating yourself from community. And that's ultimately the worst thing that you can do when you're going through any type of failure, or any type of loss, or any type of pain, because it's in that like space by yourself that you end up getting trapped in your mind and in your thoughts, and you're going through shit, you know?
Yeah. I always say you can't, if you, well, maybe not one way, but I think a good rule of thumb is like you can't think your way out of bad thinking. I think it takes action. But yeah, isolation will definitely, it becomes a vicious cycle.
Yeah, and it's just like, I think if I had been involved in a community, that would have been great. And I had a great community here at VU Church in Miami. And I had a great community, but I just wasn't sharing what I was going through with people because I was embarrassed. Yeah. I mean, I had this beautiful car. I had this beautiful place. I was doing well for myself, and I wanted people to perceive me as being that person. Ultimately, I allowed my perception that I thought other people had of me to dictate how I was running my life. And I continued to try to live above my means in the manner that I was living before the business, failed.
That's a tough one, man. Businesses. That's a tough one.
I think ultimately, like, the majority of my credit card debt that I was in could stem from not just the business failing. I like to use that as an excuse, or I did, but it was ultimately me trying to live a life that I couldn't afford. I was trying to maintain.
Living outside your means will mess you up, especially, and I feel like this is a lot of what is happening in, like, entrepreneurship has gotten so popular now. So, like, my thing is real estate, right? And I see a lot of people fall into it. I fell into it too, like, trying to prove to people that, and you see it here in Miami, like, this is the city for, flexing, like stuff that you don't have. And that's why now, like, I think it's really important for me to, like, build. Obviously, you have to have a brand. Like, marketing is important. You have to have a brand. But just being honest with where you are, and if you bring value to the table and your knowledge and what you can do, the money will come. Like, I make way more money now. I'm much more vigilant with my dollars now than when I was making, a sixth of what I make now. But all of that is a process, but it is a process that you have to go through. And it definitely, going back to what you just said, Andrew, around being embarrassed. Like, it's tough when you're, using myself as an example, you tell people, like, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to grind it out, you're grinding, or you start some venture, right? I've done so many ventures, and then they fail, and then it's like, now you got to come back to those same people and say, yo, that thing I said I was going to do, it didn't work out. But I think I'm at the point now where it's just like, hey, I know that that's the process. If I look at, the people that I look up to, if you're in the mindset space, people that everybody knows, like Tony Robbins, Les Brown, millions of others, you have to fail. Failure is part of the learning process as long as you learn.
That's true. And, I don't want to, like, leave it in this, like, very, because we're obviously, like, talking about rock bottom. So for a lot of people, they're going to, like, feel the emotions, as we talk about them. And, I'll kind of, like, switch it up after I kind of discuss, like, where I felt like my rock bottom was, because it wasn't just, like, going through this process. This was, like, the tip of the iceberg that led up to my rock bottom. Like, I'm just kind of describing the backstory of how it happened.
Yeah.
And kind of, like, I did a lot of self-reflection to get to this point, to realize that I was embarrassed, to be able to proclaim that and be honest with myself about that, and to admit to myself and others, publicly, that I was living above my means and trying to be this person that I was so, like, consumed with people's perception of me, and I just wasn't true to myself or what I was going through at the moment. Ultimately, I remember before I moved back home, and I did end up moving back home, which was my rock bottom. I remember being, like, I was sitting on this bench down by the river in Miami. I was looking literally on the riverside. And I was sitting on the bench looking at Brickell City Center, and I literally started bawling, crying. Like, bawling. I was so stressed out because of everything that was happening. I literally had to go see a doctor. I saw a doctor on Miami Beach that I couldn't afford. I used, like, my last few dollars on my credit card limit, like, because everything was maxed out, to literally pay for this doctor to tell me that, like, everything was fucked up because I was so stressed out. My body was, like, not producing testosterone right. Like, my estrogen levels were high, my cortisone levels were high. I was losing all my hair. Like, it's obviously gone now, but I think that kind of pushed it quite a bit. And I just remember, like, I didn't feel good. Like, not only was I going through everything emotionally, financially and everything, but, like, physically, I felt sick.
Yeah.
And I remember just sitting on this bench being like, this is it. Like, what am I going to do? And I just started bawling, crying, and I just surrendered. And I was just like, I felt like, I was praying about it, and I hadn't done that in so long. Yeah. And so I was praying about it, and I was just like, what do you want me to do? And I just felt like something told me, go home. You got to go home. Yeah. And so that's ultimately what I did. I called my parents and I told them, like, hey, mom and dad, like, I'm coming home. I need you to spot me, like, a rental car, because I can't even pay for that.
Going home is very grounding. It is.
But they were so happy. When I told my parents that I was coming home, they started crying on the phone. They were like, we've been praying about this for months because we thought you were going through something.
Really?
So I think that was like huge for me. I ended up going home. I was listening to audiobooks the whole way back. I listened to Think and Grow Rich. I listened to Outwitting the Devil, both by Napoleon Hill.
Read them.
And these are kind of the two books that really launched this movement of me kind of getting into this space of personal development and self-reflection. And when I got home, I was so sad. Much like you, like imagine like you told me in the car ride earlier, you're like, I was in like the heart of St. Louis living by myself. I had not, I left home at 18 and now I'm like back at my parents' house, seeing all the people that I went to school with. It's just such a humbling feeling. And that's what it was for me. Imagine I went from this beautiful city living like just like something that these people, even myself being from this town, had never even imagined or dreamed of. And then I went back to this town and I'm seeing all the people that I went to high school with. And I just like, I don't have a car. I'm not working. I'm in all this debt. And it was just so sad. And I remember being on the phone with an attorney and being like, I'm going to file bankruptcy because of all this debt.
Yeah.
And just something told me like, don't do it. Because like your bread and butter is doing mortgages, and like what's going to be your means of income if you file bankruptcy, because you're going to lose your license,
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so for me, it depends on the state, but I mean, what I ended up doing was I just said, you know what, I'm going to make a call. And so it just so happens that the CEO of the company that I was managing here, the mortgage company I was managing here in Miami, his home office is in Maryland, which is like an hour and a half from my parents' house. So I call him and I'm like, I explained to him what was going on and I just said, look, I need a job. And he's like, no, like we'll have to think about it. And I called him, I harassed him until he said yes.
There it is.
And that was like the trigger that got me out of the hole. Yeah. I ended up going to Maryland. I got this, like, I rented a room off of Craigslist for $500 a month.
Nice.
And it had no Wi-Fi. It had like nothing. So I would go into the
room.
Yeah, I would go into the room. My phone didn't work. There was no service. It was in the basement, right? So at night I had no service. I had nothing. So I would read at night. And then in the morning I would wake up, and because the only thing that worked on my phone was the alarm. When you don't have service, I'm basically on airplane mode. And I would wake up in the morning and I would just go to work, and I'd work for like 20 hours a day. Yeah. And I would go home. I would sleep a few hours. I would get back up. I would hit the gym in the morning. I would work all day. I would hit yoga at night to try to like cool off. And then I would sleep. And I just did this routine for 6.5 months until I had paid off all of my debt. And I was so like dead set on coming back to Miami. And I knew that I wasn't going to be in Maryland much longer, that like I didn't accept it as my reality, so much so that I didn't even make friends there. I met 1 or 2 people that I still, talk to this day, but I purposely did not want to make friends in Maryland because I knew that I was leaving. I was that dead set on my goal of coming back to Miami.
That's good. I mean, and that's how it's got to be. And I think there's 2 big things, especially if you're in rock bottom right now. There's a few other stories. I won't get too deep into it because Andrew's, I think, has a really good example. But, I had to squat in college. I was so broke, I literally squatted in college, right? So I knew somebody who basically had an apartment and then they canceled their like lease, and then they just told me the unit, and I literally took summer classes. I would climb into this apartment because it was on the 2nd floor. Yeah, every day I would climb in, go through the sliding door. I picked up a futon out of a dumpster.
Get out of here.
And that's what I did for an entire summer. And I just grinded. I didn't tell anybody, obviously, because I was squatting, but you do what you got to do. And I think ultimately, no matter how bad it gets, if you're in the mud right now, you just have to realize that whether it's because of a failed venture or not, like if you risk it all, you might lose it all. Yeah. Like straight up, that's kind of the name of the game. And you have to realize that. I think a lot of people think that just because they work hard or they try hard that they won't fail. It's like you very well might fail, and that's okay because that's a lesson. But it also just creates kind of this foundation for future success. Like being able to have that grind. Like I'm very sure, like obviously you can kind of become, like we're saying, like you can become jaded because of some of these things, but it also creates like, honestly, like this level within like your mind of like, I've been through this. So it's just this is whatever,
And I think it helps you approach life and business with just a whole different confidence once you've been through it. Yeah. Not just like, because obviously your confidence is damn near shot when you're going through it, right? But when you come out of it, it's just like a whole nother just confidence. Yeah. There's a book, it's like the Journey of the Warrior or something like that, A Warrior's Journey.
I haven't read that one.
So like, I feel like
give me the high level.
Well, I didn't read the whole book, so let's.
What's it
not
about?
dive too deep.
Yeah.
But no, let me. So like the premise of like having that warrior mentality is when you've gone through the trenches and you've gone through the battle, like you come out a champion. For
sure.
You know.
Yeah.
But like the warrior is isolated at times, and like you squatting, you're alone. You know, like you're not bringing girls back to the crib through the sliding door.
You're
and like. And I wasn't gonna bring
the girl
anybody
at
back.
The time did come through once.
Oh, for real?
Yeah, but it was squatted.
Man.
Look, but
on the dumpster futon.
Look, bro.
Forrest got game though. Forrest.
I do have game. But here's the thing though. Like that's all fun when you're young, and I mean honestly, I would do that now though. Like I tell my business partners, and obviously I'm much better at managing money. I make much more money now, so I'm not as at risk as that. But I'm not afraid. What I tell people is like, I'm literally not afraid of being broke. That's where that has got me, because I know that I'm good at making money. Yeah. So I don't want to lose money. Don't like it, but because I've went through these experiences where it's like, I know for a fact that I will squat. I'll do whatever I have to do to just get it done, because I've done it. And so it's like, I'm not afraid of being broke. Like if I lost all my money tomorrow, like I know I can make more money. It's just, so I always have that in my back pocket. But yeah, and I think the mindset of a warrior is a good analogy. I think it's a good mentality for the way that you should approach life and success, because like it's a battle, right? A warrior is, whether you're in attack mode or defend mode, like you're always ready for the next, altercation or the next thing that you have to cross, whatever it is. The warrior, maybe the adventurer if you're on a journey, but you're moving forward and you're preparing yourself for what is next, and you might lose some battles, but the goal is, to win the war ultimately. So,
and I think also what it does is, any failure, any loss, or any really rock bottom situation, it puts you in a position where you've got a choice to make. Yeah. Right. And you're either gonna be defeated or you're gonna go all in. Yeah. And for me, going all in was making that decision to come up with a plan. I didn't file bankruptcy. I didn't want to take the easy way out. I made a plan. I organized my debts from smallest to largest. Dave Ramsey has this method called the snowball method, right? Yep. And so I started with the small wins. I got the small debts knocked out.
So wait, what is the snowball? It's basically where you pay off the smallest debts first instead of doing like the highest interest rate. The goal is basically where you
want to get small wins.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So if you've got like $100 credit card, $1,500, $3,000, $7,000, $15,000, you want to put them in that order, and you want to start banging out the small ones first. Right. What I would do is I would bang out the small ones like with my little checks, and when I would get a big commission check, I would smack out a big one. Nice. Because the big ones had crazy interest. Like my credit cards were at like 29%, which is insane. So for a $23,000 balance, like it's a lot of interest you're paying. So what I did was I would knock out the little ones and then get a big check, score, close out a big balance, right? Yeah. But ultimately the decision, that I'm referring to is believe it or not, I hated mortgages.
Really?
I always hated mortgages. And I think it's because I didn't like the way that we were working with people. I never felt like I was like helping them. Sure. I always felt like it was about the money, every company I worked for, even the one that I was managing. And it wasn't until I got back to Miami and I'm doing what I'm doing now, do I really feel like I'm helping people? And it's amazing because I get people now, they get turned down from 17 banks and then they come to me and I'm like, they're saving grace. Right, I get the deal done, So I'm like genuinely helping people and it's great. Nice. And I cut my commission to make things happen, but I have that luxury now. And, back then I hated mortgages so much that my fallback was to go back to being a financial advisor because I still have my licenses, the Series 7, 66. Yeah. And in that moment, it was actually like at that rock bottom place, I decided I was going to go all in on mortgages and I let my license lapse. So I never got it. I had an opportunity to hang it with a firm so that it wouldn't lapse. Yeah. And I let it go. And I was like, I'm going all in on mortgages. You gotta do it. And it was that decision to go all in and like not entertain different options and, get a 9-to-5 here or, do this here or like, whatever. People got their side hustles. I don't knock it. I even have one now. For like personal hobbies, but those are personal hobbies. Like my all in is still mortgages. Yeah. And I think ultimately when you make a decision to be very good at one thing, you can get yourself out of anything because you become an expert in that field.
That's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah.
So The One Thing, there's a book called The One Thing. Read it. I want to take that into, kind of our closing thoughts. Like, what do you want to end this with? The big takeaways. I think we shared a lot of stuff, but what do you want people to take away from this?
Yeah. So I don't want to take away, like, obviously we shared a lot about the experiences that we've been through, right?
Yeah.
But it wasn't just so that we could kind of like boast about what we've been through or like my journey was harder than yours. Cause obviously people out there have been through some shit, ultimately what I'd like to kind of leave off with is I went through what I went through, but I came back to Miami stronger than ever. I came back and I was more successful than I was, before this through a pandemic.
Yeah.
And now I am where I am today. I have a beautiful girlfriend. We stay at an incredible place. I have a nice car again. So like I am in a place that is way better than I was when I left or before I left when I thought that I was winning. But I'm now approaching it with like a humbled spirit, and that never would have happened. I would not be where I am today if I had not been through rock bottom. That rock bottom made me who I am. I never even had work ethic, to be honest. Like I grew up working on a farm, but like I was always doing the bare minimum. Every job I ever had in life, I was always doing the bare minimum. And people used to always tell me like, you have so much potential. You're not living up to your potential. And I used to just not care because like I didn't have that drive. Yeah. That rock bottom moment where I had to pay off the debt and like I had to move back home and I had to go through all of that humiliation. That gave me the work ethic and the drive that I have now that's made me so successful.
Love it, man. So here's the thing, guys. We'll go ahead and close this out, I guess. I'm going to pick this up and hopefully not make too much background noise. You just got to keep going. Rock bottom is going to happen. If you're blessed to where you haven't had a really, bad experience, that's great too. I think you kind of have to maybe define a rock bottom in your life. But I think it's generally good to understand that while we do live in the moment as people, for sure. It can be really hard, especially when you have the weight of, I've got a bill due in 2 weeks and I've got no money, and then I've got another bill after that, and
it's past due.
It's past due, and I still don't have any money, and then the people that used to look up to me are now looking down on me, or the things that I said I was going to be able to do, I failed at those things, and I made promises to people that I wasn't able to keep. And all of this weight builds up on you, and you're not able to eat right because you don't have food, and you can't work out because you don't have money for the gym, and all these things pile up on top of you. But you can get out of it. I've gotten out of it. Andrew's gotten out of it. Tons of other people have gotten out of it. And you just have to really take it one day at a time, and just realize that the only way that you're not going to get out is if you give up. And I know it sounds really simple. It is a lot of work. It's not going to be easy. I'm not going to act like just by changing your mindset that all your problems will disappear. The only way your problems are going to disappear is if you take action, but taking action requires changing your mindset, taking accountability for your situation, and don't let your environment control you. Everybody kind of has a different environment, different surroundings, kind of a different set of cards in life. But there's always a hand that you can play. There's always some gains that can be made on the day, whether it's financially, physically, mentally. Read a book. It's the simplest thing. If you really got to, a lot of people discount the power of your mind, but what you think and what you believe affects how you perceive information. And so, you and I, depending on our mindset, might perceive, the same situation either as a complete obstacle or something that's blocking me from ever achieving my goals. And I might perceive it as a learning opportunity or a way to make money, right? Yeah. Because I can solve the problem. And that's purely based off of mindset, 100% off of mindset. It's not based off of what you know. A lot of people think, well, if I knew how to solve the problem. No, there's tons of things I don't know how to solve, but I just know that I can figure it out, right? And a lot of that is through just toughing it out. So, yeah, I guess we'll wrap it up there. This is the #1 podcast in the world. Thank you for joining us on our first episode. Check us out on Instagram. You can reach me at Forrest the Investor. Andrew, where can they find you?
Drew's the Move on Instagram.
Drew's the Move. And see you in the next one.
Signing out.